And welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. We are still covering the Jason Van Dyke case right now, and Monday is going to be the beginning of the defense's case, and we can't wait to watch it. But right now, we are analyzing it in its entirety. And right now, we have a very special guest to talk more about the impact of this trial. Joining us here on Law and Crime is the Reverend Jesse Jackson. Reverend, great to have you here on Law and Crime.
How do you do?
Okay, so you have made the decision to personally attend the trial. Why?
It is an horrendous killing, but it is a part of a pattern of killings. Chicago, the last 4 years, the most people killed in America by police have been in Chicago, 70. The top 10, Chicago is number one. That's a part of it. Secondly, the cover-up. For 400 days, the tape was suppressed, and it covered the span of the political election season, really. So 400 days of cover-up, and when the police first testified, those who were present with Van Dyke, they lied. They told one story to the press. They told another story, quite a different story. They told on the stand the other day when they were on the oath. So really, 400 days, 16 shots in the cover-up.
And you have categorized and classified this shooting as a legal lynching. What did you mean by that?
Well, much like the case of Emmett Till, where he was taken away and killed, and then they lied. And Fred Hampton was shot in his bed, set up by the police. This was a police calculated killing, and they lied and covered it up.
So where we're at right now, the prosecution has rested their case. The defense is going to begin their case on Monday. What is going to happen if at the conclusion of this case, the jury comes back and returns a verdict of not guilty?
It's very difficult to say. We would hope that I was in trial, as you know, the other day when the medical examiner, examined by the prosecutor, went through step by step each shot. Clearly, Laquan McDonald, the police who were there, he had engaged in conversation with them. He had a small knife, but he walked away. Van Dyke came, and within 6 seconds, he began shooting. Laquan was going away from him down the street, and he almost came out the car with guns ablazing. Shot him 16 seconds. The first 2 times, the bullet hit him and spun him around. And so the last 14 shots, he really was on the ground when he was being shot. And he unloaded his magazine about to shoot some more, and someone finally stopped him. He had really went to a kind of mental state of passion, of killing.
Clearly,
in other words, the Laquan McDonald was no threat. Police were on the scene. Less of a threat to Van Dyke, who came to the scene. And when the defense asked that they, with a 6-inch knife, be a threat to someone 7 feet away, asked if you had a gun and they had a knife, it would not be a threat 7 feet away. But that was not the scene at all. The defense was trying to make a case that the police were threatened by Laquan McDonald, but the film shows that he was going away from them, not coming toward them.
Right, and you add that to the fact that they said, hey, there was a taser unit in the area, there was no civilians in the area, what is the threat? Having said that, we're going to wait to see what the defense ultimately argues. We heard a little bit of it in the opening statement, we've seen a little bit in the cross-examination. The supporters of Van Dyke, the people who look at this case and say, hey, listen, you know what, Laquan McDonald, the knife in his hand, the drugs in his system, the erratic behavior, these are factors you have to look at. What would you say to the people that are arguing that in favor of Van Dyke?
Whatever was in his system, he was not approaching the police with a knife. He was not trying to avoid him with a knife. Those with whom he had engaged, they had disengaged. You see him walking away down the street. There were no civilians in the area, and he's hit from a distance with people. No one was within 30 feet of him. Completely spun around, and the guy emptied the gun in him. That's why I said, like Emmett Till, like Fred Hampton shot while asleep by the police, like the case of Laquan, this is a legal lynching, and they should be found guilty and prosecuted, because without the prosecution of this case, it sends a system of a breakdown of law and order, and no telling how the community will respond.
You know, we've covered a lot of these kinds of cases before, and sometimes the officers are found guilty. Sometimes the trials end in mistrials, but we've seen other situations where the verdict comes back not guilty. And we always try to predict what the reaction is going to be from the different camps and the different community. Again, I'm curious, if it comes back a guilty verdict, there's one answer. But if it really comes back as a not guilty verdict, where does the community move forward from here? What do we say moving forward from this case?
In the case of Fred Hampton, the community was disciplined. They knew that the police had set up a scene to kill him. They became angry, and they removed the state's attorney. They fought back politically at the polls. In the case when Laquan McDonald was shot, we moved the district attorney. That was the first political move of the reaction to his being killed, and that was a cover-up. And so now we hope that the people remain disciplined and take their anger out on November the 6th and on March of the election next year, because the most effective way to fight back in these situations is to show the political power necessary to build the terror.
Well, do you condone the protests and the calls for resignations outside of the fate of Van Dyke, other people answering for this? What do you say to them?
Well, those who had the film and covered it up. Now, I talked with Police Chief McCarthy, who he said the mayor covered it up. Whoever covered it up has some burden of responsibility for covering up a crime, whoever did it. And that's what the investigation should show. Whoever covered it up must accept responsibility. The police who misled and lied about it. Now, one of the police who lied about it, he immediately retired, moved himself off of the scene. Two others, because police chief said he didn't have the power to fire them, and so they resigned. So it's just been just a kind of breakdown of the criminal justice system at the expense of young black men. And again, this is Chicago's #1. The top 10 cities in the last 4 years, 2010 to 2014, 70 have been killed in this way, 70.
You've correct me if I'm wrong, but you've also said that you'd like the Department of Justice to take a role in reviewing this matter. What did you mean by that?
Well, because these lynchings are not just local. The problem that we have now is, of course, even though from 1880 to 1950, there were 5,000 blacks lynched as a form of political control and exploitation. But lynching is not yet a federal crime, A. And B, this Department of Justice is so weak on the issue of civil rights, it hardly seems that one is motivated to go to this Department of Justice because it's a part of the problem. That's what makes this a very horrific season for us. The Department of Justice is itself against voting rights. This Department of Justice itself is against fair order and justice.
You know, we look at these kinds of different movements and these kinds of cases, and people can make the argument that things are different now than they were 20 years ago, or maybe 5 years ago, maybe not. But for you, what are your hopes for a change in maybe Chicago and America in general in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years? What would you really like to see, maybe both in the police department and, you know, in our community at large and the way we view things?
One thing strikes me in the greater Cook County area, 25% of the voters are African American. There's one black juror out of 12, one black juror, one Asian juror, 3 Latinos, and 7 whites. In the case of Emmett Till in 1955, there were no blacks on the jury. Here we have one black on the jury 65 years later. That's real slow progress. We deserve a jury that appears and represents. This jury itself does not represent the community from which Laquan McDonald comes.
And what about the argument that they tried to find an impartial jury, and hey, we can't take race as a factor? We looked at their background, we looked at their race, that was a factor, but you have to look at their whole circumstances and all these other factors, not just race.
Well, they could come from the community where the police live. For example, the judge said the other day there should be no pictures taken in the courtroom because some jurors submitted to the police that their images may be shown on television or something. but the police are looking directly at the jury. They know who's on the jury. So it could be a case of jurors being intimidated by the police. I mean, the jury has not been sequestered, for example. So it's known who the jurors are. The names are on the paper, but the police are looking at them and know where they live. So it could be a case of jury intimidation as well as to be considered.
You know, there are those who argue that the laws are too favorable to police officers, and it's almost as if you take their word for it and try to explain away what they did. Do you think that in the country we live in right now, the judicial system we have, the laws are too protective or favorable to law enforcement in these kinds of situations?
Well, first of all, we tend to have an appreciation of the role that law enforcement, law officers play. We're very sensitive to the role that they play. Rogue officers who often shoot people, they're protected by their fellow officers. That's why when Van Dyke did the killing, police who saw it lied about it. They're covering up the call, the blue flu. They lied up. They saw the killing, and they lied. Were it not for the camera, their lie in court. Their testimony would have been valid. But those police who saw it said Van Dyke was coming toward the police. You clearly see in this film he was going away from them. So they lied, and they should be charged as heavily as Van Dyke himself.
It's as we've been talking, we've been playing the dash cam footage of probably the most important piece of evidence in this entire case. The advent of body cam footage and dash cam footage that captures a lot of these incidents and a lot of these shootings, you think it's helped or you think it's hurt in a way?
It's helped in absolute ways because the case of the killing in North Charleston, South Carolina, the case of Rodney King, the newest factor in police being exposed has been the camera, because whenever these killings have taken place in the past, the shooter lied, the officers with that person lied, and they come to court with their blue uniforms on and their badges and their fellow officers. They have a kind of credibility, a kind of moral authority that exempts them from justice. So these cameras have been a net asset toward justice.
I think the major obstacle is, and everybody asks in these kinds of cases, again, we cover a lot of them here on Law and Crime, is what's the solution? So how do we create a better relationship moving forward between law enforcement and the public? Do you have any suggestions moving forward about how do we create there's a problem. There's clearly a problem. We keep seeing it every year, and I cover constantly these shootings. So what is the solution moving forward? We clearly see what the problem is.
If no one's above the law, then when you shoot somebody in cold blood, it's murder. You use language that depicts what happened. Laquan McDonald was murdered by the police. He was lynched by the police, and the police who lynched and those who observed it lied about it. The swift justice that they should receive, the punishment should be a deterrent for others of them. If for example, if the killer walks away free in this situation, it just simply further corrodes the relationship between police and people, and we as a people deserve better.
I know you've stood with Laquan McDonald's family through this trial. How are they doing? Because any case is tough for any family to recount and have to watch this video and hear testimony about the shooting. So how are they doing throughout this whole trial and the process?
Very, very difficult. I know that the uncle has been very forthright, the pastor. Has been very clear on his analysis. But I sat near the mother the other day, and she had to watch the medical examiner go through 16 shots painfully, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, where the bullets went in, where the bullets exited. For parents to say and watch their child alive on one part of the film and dead on the other is a heavy burden to bear. And we cannot take for granted in any way just how horrendous this is. And they deserve justice.
The victim's uncle stood next to you during this case and said that justice was on trial, not Jason Van Dyke. Do you agree with him?
He's right, and it's not just local, it's national. I mean, you look at, in every state, there are more blacks in jail than there are in college in every state. In every state, prosecutors often use the case of injuring or killing blacks as a stepping stone to become for higher political office. I mean, don't forget that the 13th Amendment said all blacks are free except those in jail. So in a real sense, jail and slavery remains very much the same. For us going to jail, you lose your rights. If you're black, you lose your rights. And the racial disparity is unacceptable.
We know the defense is beginning on Monday. What do you think about what they're going to be doing moving forward in this case? And I know it's going to be difficult to watch both from Laquan McDonald's family and from your position, because what they seem to have done at the beginning, and we've seen a little bit, is try to blame the victim, say that he was, this is why he was acting erratically, and this is
eyewitnesses, and 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 the camera to say and to show what happened. So it'd be very difficult for the defense to justify this lynching as justifiable.
Are you going to go back to trial? Are you going to go back to the courtroom?
I expect to do so, and I think that in some sense, Chicago is on trial. Chicago is the #1 city in the country for killing young blacks, and the scene. This scene is so captured on camera. It's a good time to just stop it, and even the police, the FBI, who was on trial, who was the witness. So the police are to shoot to avoid danger, or to stop or to injure. But to shoot to kill is not even what they're trained to do. This guy, not only did he shoot the coin, you see him walking down, you see him shot and turned around. He's hit again in this film. And then he shoots him 14 more times on the ground. This is a horrible legal lynching, and it's unacceptable.
We had a law enforcement expert who came on and debated whether or not when an officer uses deadly force, they have to sometimes unload their weapon and make sure the threat is down. What would you say to that belief, that idea?
If prosecuted in some way, that's prosecuted in some way, that's one result. If they're set free, that's another. And the community deserves, in this case, fairness and justice. We hope for the best.
Right.
Expect the worst and fight for whatever comes out.
Reverend Jackson, thank you so much for coming on Law and Crime and taking some time to speak with us.
Thank you, sir.
All right, everybody, we're going to take a quick break. A lot to discuss when we get back. Stay tuned.